Maybe you've recently received your GAMSAT results and want to improve your score, or you're thinking about sitting the GAMSAT for the first time. In this video, I'll be joined by my friend Kenneth, who received the highest GAMSAT score for his sitting. We'll be talking about how you can do well in the exam, sharing some advice on how to better prepare for it, and how you can approach each of the sections. But first, if you're new to the channel, my name is Sebastian and I'm a medical student from Australia. And today's video will be a little bit longer and a little bit different to the usual ones, so I put timestamps to each of the sections in the description below. Now grab some snacks and I hope you enjoy the conversation. A little bit about us. I sat the GAMSAT 4 times and my marks were a little bit of a roller coaster. They went up and down, but if you want to see my full GAMSAT experience, I'll link the video that I talked about, all the stuff on it, somewhere here. But Kenneth, tell us a little bit about your GAMSAT experience.
Sure. So to begin with, my background was paramedic practice. So originally all I wanted to be was a paramedic. But when I wasn't able to get into the ambulance service that I wanted, I thought about doing postgraduate medicine. So I prepared for a couple of months to do the GAMSAT, and to my surprise, when I got my results back, I got a 90. So I got a 90 in section 1, a 75 in section 2, and a 98 in section 3, so 90 overall. And that was enough to get me into the university we're at currently. So me and Sebastian are in the same course. Since then, I've been helping some people with the GAMSAT, and I think I've picked up a couple of things that I think I can really share with you guys.
What are they testing? With a general science exam in undergraduate studies, your test will be something like this. The more you study, the better your mark is. The more content you learn for it, the better your mark is. But GAMSAT doesn't really follow the same trend, and it's a little bit different. It's not really content based. So Kenneth, tell us what you think the GAMSAT is testing.
Well, you're right that the GAMSAT is quite a unique exam. I think that it tests things that have to do with general intelligence, which is why some people can walk into the exam not having prepared very much and still do very well. They want you to be able to learn quickly, to be able to communicate effectively, and to be able to problem solve. And the problem with these things are that it's very hard to study traditionally for them because it's, like you said, it's not about content. One thing I always say about the GAMSAT is that you cannot study for it, but you can only practice for it.
Section 1, Reasoning and Humanities. So section 1, the dreaded section 1, it was not my best section, and if you don't know what it is, it's the Reasoning and Humanities section. And what they'll do is they'll give you a bunch of questions from passages in journal articles, newspapers. They might give you a poem, a cartoon to critique, and you'll be looking and trying to analyze the tone of the passage. You'll have to understand what the words meant and basically analyzing what the author's trying to convey. And section 1 is really difficult for a lot of students, for a lot of people. So Kenneth, tell me about how you would approach section 1.
So to begin with, I think section 1 you need very strong skills in reading. You need a very decent vocabulary. If you're not understanding a lot of what the questions are trying to convey, there's absolutely no way you can access the information within the passages. On top of that, I guess you want to be very quick in reading. You don't want to run out of time in section 1.
I talked about this in a previous video. Speed reading really helps learning how to quickly comprehend in the shortest amount of time.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. The other kind of things that you would want is you want to be able to really read between the lines. To be able to get implications from passages that aren't immediately obvious. So in addition to being able to understand subtle connotations of words, you also want to be able to have a strong sense of reasoning that can draw conclusions from things that aren't directly spoken. Yeah. But I think the biggest tip that I can give in section 1 is every time you get an answer, you want to be able to justify it from the passage. If you tell me that it can't possibly be a certain answer, and oftentimes you want to be able to rule out 3 answers to get the correct one, you need to show me exactly in the passage where you can get that.
And I think it also comes to a lot of understanding about the actual text types. If you've never seen poetry or never read poetry, you're going to have a hard time understanding any poetry they throw at you. If you've never looked at satire or cartoons that make fun of something, you're not going to be understand what the humor is in it. So really having a wide spread of sources that you've been reading, drilling down on why you're choosing the question or why you're choosing the answer that you are, I think that's really going to help. So was there anything else that you would do for section 1?
I'd say when it comes to vocabulary, a lot of people think that they know what words mean when they really don't. So when you're reading something and you think that you know what a difficult word means, really ask yourself, could I define this correctly? And then check it.
Could I use it in a sentence?
Could you use it in a sentence? Exactly. And you might find that you're a lot less precise than you want to be. And you need precision, and you need an ability to deeply read in order to do well in section 1.
Because for me, it was a lot of 50-50s, and in the end, my result reflected on that. I was probably getting a lot of them wrong because I really didn't understand it at its core. So when it comes to these niche words or the tone, was he angry, was he resentful, like you're really gonna have to know and not just guesstimate to do well and to better your mark.
I would say that ideally, the GAMSAT is constructed in a way where the answers are not ambiguous. You shouldn't be getting 50-50s and choosing the best answer. You should know that one answer is right and one answer is wrong. And if you aren't at that place yet, it's possible that you haven't understood the question or the answers that they're provided.
So what do you think the students should be doing to really practice approaching these questions and getting the answers correct?
I think that for every question, you should be trying to understand the passage and definitely understand what all the answers are trying to say in the ASA practice questions. You should also be trying to get to a point where you can confidently say why one answer is the correct answer.
I've heard that there's a technique that you can use where you read the answers first and then you go back to the stem and then you go back between them. Do you recommend doing that? Is that something that you would do?
So when I usually would read the question first. And sometimes you can read the question first and the answer with the question without any context is very understandable. And then you can look for the answer in the passage. At other times, you'll read the question first and not have enough context to understand what it's saying. So at that point, you need to go back into the passage and read it thoroughly and understand its point before you can approach the question. That's how I think I'd answer that.
Section 2, written communication. Section 2, I think, is one of the sections that you can improve your mark the quickest from 1 month of practice to the next. And it really comes down to knowing a few things. One is the structure, and you also want to practice planning out your essay beforehand. I'd suggest spending that first little bit of time to just plan and then prepare to know what your argument, what the core of what you're trying to say even means before you start writing mindlessly on the page. But Kenneth, what are some things that you do to help you with writing your essays?
So I guess to begin with, those things are very important, but I think the most important thing when writing section 2 is first, you have to figure out what it is you're doing. And what you're doing is you're trying to put across ideas that are going to be interesting to you. Because if they're not interesting to you, they're not going to be interesting to anyone else. So you want to write about things that you actually believe in. I think that's really, really important. And the things that you mentioned to do with structure and to do with planning are things that help you express those ideas. There are a couple of other things that I could mention that people would need to focus on, such as like spelling and grammar, and to do with the flow of ideas. But again, all of these are to serve the expression of your ideas. And so
wait, what you're trying to say is that if you don't have the right idea or your argument from the get-go, no matter how flourishy your language is, it's not going to really work, is it?
That's right. So if it's not actually interesting to you, it's not going to be interesting to anyone. And no matter how good your structure is, no matter how fancy the words that you use are, it's not going to help. And it would be better to have a simple structure. It would be better to have simple words and express an idea that's actually interesting.
And in terms of these ideas, what are some things that would help you create a good one or make something that's interesting when really you get a topic that you're not familiar with? How would you go about that?
The thing about the topics that the GAMSAT will give you is that they are topics that everyone is familiar with in some way. So for example, on the subject of technology, a lot of people would write an essay that says, well, here are some good things about technology and here are some bad things about technology. So as you can see, technology is both good and bad. And I think that that's not a very interesting idea. It's something that anyone can come up with. It's something that anyone can kind of see after thinking about it. It's obvious. One way I would think about it, for example, is that it's something that allows you to do something. It creates a power to do something. It makes things faster. It makes things more efficient. It creates possibilities. And with power, there's always going to be good and bad. And if you were to explore ideas like that, to analyze a little bit deeper, and the quotes will help you do that, will help you explore things that are slightly more interesting. And oftentimes there'll be one quote, for example, that is completely ridiculous, that no one would accept. It's good to explore why exactly is that quote so ridiculous? Like, why exactly would I disagree with that? One technique that I've seen is that you're sitting around a table and one of your friends says one of those quotes. It's like, well, maybe 5 of your friends say 5 different quotes. You don't have to respond to every one. Just think about what's the most interesting thing to respond to. How would you continue that conversation?
And I think also, if you're interested about a topic or a subject matter or something like that. For example, I'm into gaming. I've been into gaming since I was a little kid. And in the discussion of technology, there's a whole rise in electronic sports or esports. And it's basically gamers doing this full time, and it's almost a sport. You compete on different games and massive crowds watch. And I think technology as a platform has shaped how we view sport in itself. But really, it's evolving and it's changing. And if you wanted to talk about technology in that light, that's okay, go for it. Use your interests. And as Tim Ferriss said, you want to triple down on your strengths.
You don't necessarily have to structure your piece in the form of an essay. If you want to do it in the form of an essay, what you were saying about structure before is very important. Like, that's the best way to convey your ideas in that sense. But the GAMSAT's instructions say you just need to provide a piece of writing. And that could be in the form of poetry, which is very difficult. Or it could be something like you would write in a Facebook comment, which is fairly casual. But so long as it conveys ideas effectively, you can use whatever format that you like. I think a lot of people focus on trying to remember like stories or anecdotes or philosophy or history. It's like all those things are great. But if someone tells you that that's a great thing to do, don't just accept that because it brought success for someone else. If it helps your ideas, if it helps build your argument, then use them. Use them as illustrations. But even without them, you've had so much experience with society, you've had so much experience with personal character, your friends, your family, your own experiences, even what you see in media. I think that's a good point, actually. You can use examples from what you've read in fiction, even. You can use things that are just stories, but illustrate your point effectively.
I think just with section 2, formulate your structure, but work on your ideas, and remember that you have to speak from what interests you, and don't be afraid to be a bit more different or to think that you're going away from the status quo. Because at the end of the day, if you find it interesting, the examiner will too. Section 3, Reasoning in Biological and Physical Sciences. Section 3, all about science. So a lot of you may be like me. You're coming from a biomedical background and your first year science knowledge is pretty good. You think that the theory's down pat. But yet when you go to do the questions, you're not getting them right, it's a little bit difficult and you're just missing things and you're wondering why. I know all the theory. And Kenneth over here scored really well, but you weren't really from that science background. So what exactly were you doing that was helping you with section 3?
Well, yeah, I would agree. I'm not necessarily the best person at science. I did do chemistry and physics in high school, and there was a bit of biology in my undergrad. But I think it wasn't really about being the best science whiz you could be. It was more similar to section 1 in that you really needed to be able to get all the information off the page and use it well. But in addition to that, in section 3, there's a lot of problem-solving elements as well. So as well as being able to get all the information in the question, you needed to be able to process it oftentimes with rules that they would give you. So there were a lot of questions that you would have to be able to pick up patterns very quickly that they were trying to show you and then put the information that you have into those patterns. It's those kind of things that they're trying to get you to do. It's not about memorizing the knowledge. So don't try and rely on the knowledge that you have for the most part.
So I think the knowledge aspect of it, having the background foundational theory, what that's going to help you with is not getting the answer correct, but timing and speeding up how quickly you can answer the question, because you won't have to read as much in the STEM.
Yeah, you will be able to kind of get some things more quickly and understand some things more quickly because the context will be more familiar for you. At the same time, it can distract you. It can make you think that it's just about something that you need to remember, when in fact you just need to read closely and all the information you need is there on the page. Yeah.
So what are some specific things that you should be looking out for, or some question areas that you should be thinking about?
If you're talking about the background information that you do need from science. I'd probably say there are some simple things like you need to know like your basic elements. You need to know what Na stands for, what H stand for. You need to know Mendelian genetics. You need to know how logarithms work. I would say that a really big area of focus is being able to do mental arithmetic quickly. That's something that's something that can really help you speed up your approach to questions. You need to be able to rearrange equations very quickly as well. I think that that's important. There's just a whole bunch of things that would help you with general science that are going to help you with this paper.
Converting units, looking at different graph types, all that will
Absolutely.
really help you when it comes to doing the questions.
I would say what's really not that important is studying deep and knowing a lot of knowledge. That's not really something that's going to help you.
I think myself and a lot of my friends included fell into the trap of going through these really dense science textbooks. And I don't think that's all that helpful, really.
Yeah, I didn't really do
that. You just got to look at the question, identify what information that you're trying to convey, and work out the patterns quickly, because that's going to really help you with the whole step. Because if you don't get the pattern, then you won't get the 3 or 4 questions attached to it.
Yeah.
How should I approach the exam? So you're getting closer to the exam date, but you're really unsure of what to do in the exam. And whether it's an online exam or whether it's in person, you're going to face some difficulties. So how should you approach it? Kenneth, what do you think you should be doing in terms of exam technique and making sure that you're level-headed?
Well, there's no use like being more anxious. That's not really going to help you, first of all. I know that doesn't really help. You can't just say stop worrying and someone will stop worrying.
Stop worrying.
Yeah. But to talk about something else, I think the biggest problem people have is that they run out of time when doing the GAMSAT. In sections 1 and 3 especially.
I know for me, like when I did section 1, I would always run out of time. In section 3, I'd really just try to get to that 110 questions, but sometimes it's tricky. So what do you suggest we do?
Well, I think in order to get more questions done, of course, you've got to increase your reading speed. You've got to find efficiencies. In section 3, there are often a lot of math shortcuts that you can use. If you're familiar with doing mental arithmetic, it's often easy to do those things. And if you can read more effectively, then you can get what a sentence is saying quicker. But even if you do these things, people will still run out of time. Even I ran out of time. So what you got to make sure is that you pass through all of the section at least once. You need to have a good shot at every question. Skip the ones you can't figure out, but there's always ones towards the end that are like fairly easy to get, and you don't want to miss out on like 5 or 10 marks that you could have gotten from questions that were easier, but that you might not see if you skip the last few.
So if you're spending like 20 minutes on a question or on a STEM, skip it, because really that's not going to be a good use of your time. You could have spent 15 minutes doing that easy question at the end.
Exactly. The way I like to best flow is I'll use all my reading time just looking at the questions and answering them in my head, and then I'll go back and circle them once writing time has begun. The other thing I'll do is I won't mark my questions down onto the answer paper until the very end. I'll do it all at once because I don't want to break my flow by going back and forth. If you don't want to do that, maybe you do them 10 at a time, or just like a couple of sections at a time.
Just find out what you prefer, I guess.
Yeah, it's not for everyone, but like these are the kind of exam techniques that I've developed like through not just the GAMSAT, but my other experiences in high school and undergrad.
And I think one benefit is if you've done it before and you didn't get the mark that you'd hoped, remember that you will get better every time. In terms of exam technique, in terms of being mentally prepared of what to expect, when to have that chocolate bar to give you that energy, it's all going to help and it's all going to improve your score. So for me, like I did it 4 times and I got a little bit worse, but then overall I got better. And I think that don't be disillusioned if you did poorly the first time, because with improving your exam technique, with knowing what to expect, and that way you won't be as stressed and you won't be as freaked out. You'll go into it with a better mindset.
Yeah.
And what are some techniques that you did to help keep your mental health in check when you're preparing for it, or just to keep the nerves down, really?
Well, I just didn't make so much of a deal out of it. I mean, like if I did well, then I did well. If I didn't, life's gonna go on. I mean, I'm a bit older than some people, and like I didn't come straight out of undergrad. I think I would have been like 23 when I took the exam. So, I'd experienced failure before. In the end, like if you don't get into med school, you're not gonna die. And
so I think treating it not as the be all end all, but as an exam that you can redo, and look at it in the bigger picture that an extra year or an extra 2 years is not the end of the world.
Who
Really,
knows?
if you're passionate about it, it will come. How should I prepare? So you've got 6 months, you've got 3 months, you've got a month. How should I be preparing? What things should I be doing? And what resources should I be using? So Kenneth, tell us a little bit about what resources you use to prepare for it and your general approach.
Okay, so the only resources that I've used to prepare were the ACER practice papers. With all the people that I've helped with the GAMSAT afterwards, I also just tell them, just use the ACER practice papers. I've looked at all the other prep material, and for the most part, especially for section 1 and section 3, like, they're not very good.
Why do you think that?
So the GAMSAT is a really difficult test, but the way that it creates its difficulty isn't by being super inaccessible or requiring a lot of knowledge beforehand. Section 1 needs a little bit of vocab, but it's not super complicated stuff. Whereas other resources, they create difficulty through other means, like they'll put in heaps of really complicated words so you can barely even comprehend the question. Or they'll make it so you need to read a lot and to get one little thing. Or they'll put really complicated diagrams in section 3, or require that you have a lot of science knowledge that you might not have going in. All these things are just fake difficulty. They're not really going to help you get better at the skills that GAMSAT is testing you on.
Why do you think the ACER materials are so good?
Okay, so the ACER materials, like I said before, they're the people who released the GAMSAT in the first place. It's the actual organization that's created the GAMSAT. And so their test papers really resemble the type of questions that you're going to get in the GAMSAT itself. They're really good for understanding what kind of things you need to look at, what kind of tricky things you need to look for. For example, in section 1, oftentimes they'll use words in really unconventional ways. They'll use words that you know in one sense, but maybe it's using it in a different way. And it's the same thing in the practice paper, in the actual paper itself. I would say the best way to prepare for sections 1 and 3 are to look at the ACER practice questions, get all 3 of the test for sure, and go through them. And not just do them to test your exam technique, but dive deep into each of the answers that you're getting. Even the ones that you get correct, if you're not sure why it's correct, you need to figure it out. You need to look deeply into it. And there's hundreds of questions there. I think once you've figured them all fully, you might have actually prepared enough to sit the exam.
And in terms of, if you have looked at the GAMSAT, you're thinking of doing it, but you really don't know where to even start, do you suggest going straight out and doing a past paper from the get-go, or building up some knowledge beforehand before approaching these ACER materials?
I think that there's a rule that if you're learning a language, there's a certain amount of words that you don't know on a page. You can't read it fluently. I think that if you feel like you're not understanding the material, you might need to read more widely and kind of build your skills of reading first. But if you're at a place where you feel like you're comfortably understanding what the answers are getting at and what the passage is getting at and what the question is asking, then you can kind of approach the paper in a couple of ways. Some people want to test their exam technique by going through the whole thing. Personally, I never even did that. I just went through each of the questions and tried to understand why the right answer that they gave was right, because they don't have worked solutions. And I found that process was the most valuable for me. It really helped me understand what they're looking for in the GAMSAT.
Okay. And touching on building up to those skills to be able to even approach those questions, it's really important to do these wide reading, or to make sure that you're looking at different text type at different sources. But not only reading fiction or reading news columns, but actually analyzing them and reading them actively. So when you're reading a passage, make sure, do I understand every word here? If there's a word that you don't understand, look it up. Make sure you know how to use it in a sentence. You're understanding how the authors convey meaning, what their tone is. In an opinion article, are they annoyed? What's the vibe of the story? You have to know where the author's coming from. And that sort of brings us into section 2 as well, because with section 2, you need to have good ideas. So wide reading is not only going to get you to read passages better, but it's going to give you some own inspiration for your own ideas when it comes to writing your essays. And I think in terms of preparing for section 2, you really need to be writing a lot. So what are some things that you suggest for section 2?
Yeah, I'd say that prep materials for section 2 are generally okay, because section 2 is really easy to write questions for, so long as they're things that you can reflect on just keep writing over and over again. Like, the more you do it, the better it's going to be. But don't just do it blindly as well. Get some feedback from people. Have some direction as to where you're trying to improve. If you're writing and it turns out your grammar's not up to par, like, you could just keep trying and hope it gets better without you even realizing that's the problem, or someone could point it out to you and you know that's something that you need to focus on. I think there's no substitute for continuing to practice though. Yeah.
So a question that I get asked all the time is, how much should I be studying and when should I start preparing for it? 3 months in advance, 6 months in advance? So Kenneth, what are some of your ideas on a study approach and how often should you be studying for?
It's really going to be different for everyone because everyone's starting off at a different place. That's what I've come to realize. And I think what's important to remember is you don't want to be killing yourself studying. You don't want to be completely obsessing over something like this. It's good to remember that this is actually a really valuable thing to be doing, because if you understand the GAMSAT to be testing, again, your ability to learn, your ability to effectively communicate, and your ability to problem solve. These are skills that we're going to be using for the rest of your lives in any field, but also especially in medicine. So don't think of it as just studying for the GAMSAT, but be patient with yourself in building these like really important lifelong skills.
Because remember, I did it 4 times and I found that although I didn't seem to be making any gains day to day, week by week, but when you looked across the 2 years that I did it, you see the changes, you're better at picking up concepts and you develop these skills. So don't get disheartened if you didn't get the best mark the first time. Remember, as Kenneth said, the skills are for life, not just for the GAMSAT. Closing thoughts. But just remember, at the end of the day, the GAMSAT is only an exam, and it's easy to place medicine on a pedestal, but you really want to look after yourself during your preparation, and you really want to be making sure that you're spending time with your hobbies and with your family and friends.
Yeah, I think the temptation, even after getting to medicine, is to overly focus on study and spend all your time doing that. But I don't think it's necessary for medicine or for the GAMSAT. We've got to remember to have a life, so remember to take it easy.
And on that note, if you guys found the information that we talked about valuable and useful, you can find us. We're doing some tutoring. Kenneth does tutoring, myself included. We'll put our links in the description below. And remember, if you enjoyed the video, smash that like button and subscribe to see more content like this. And if you have any more questions, feel free to ask us. We'll be looking at all the comments and we'll be answering your questions. And if we get enough interesting ones, we can even do another video as sort of like an FAQ sort of thing. But thanks so much for watching, and until next time, this is Sebastian.
I'm Kenneth.
Stay sharp.
Yeah.